We're going to start on Daf Chavav Amid Beis with the Gemara, and we don't really.
Sorry, which stuff? Kaf what?
Chavav Amid Beis. 3 lines
Kaf
up.
on the base. Okay.
Chavav Amid Beis, 3 lines up from the end, and Mishnah goes through various kinds of animals that are brought on the Mizbeach and how many kohanim we need to bring the basar up to the kevesh in order to put it on the Mizbeach for Torah purposes. And from time to time, the Gemara is going to make reference to this Mishnah, especially with regard to a par. The Mishnah says that a par needs 24 kohanim. So B'li Neder will try to come back to that statement. First, in order to introduce this sugya that we're about to learn, the sugya of Chizkiah, we'll read some of the psukim here at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra. And it says the following: Im ola karbano, if he's bringing a carbon ola, so we're talking about an olas yachid, min ha-bakar. So it's coming from bakar. And the Torah says in Pasuk Dalet, he needs smicha, v'samach yado rosh ha'olah. And then Pasuk Hey, v'shachat es ben ha-bakar l'fnei Hashem. Now, it's interesting, and this is going to be the main point here in our sugya, that the Torah in Pasuk Hey starts with shchita, and that's in the reach of the pasuk. No mention of the kohanim at this point. And then in the sefer of the pasuk it says v'hikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hadam. It sounds like the b'nei Aaron are receiving the dam and they're bringing it forward v'zarkas hadam al mizbeach. And that would give you the impression that the shechita itself does not require a kohen. And if we look in Pasuk Vav, then we get to 2 other kinds of avodos. Vehifshid esa ola, which means to remove the skins or the hides, and then v'nitach osa linesachel, and then they cut it up into different segments. Now, once again, are we talking about the kohanim in Pasuk Hey, or are we starting a new paragraph? And it would sound like we're starting a new paragraph, because take a look at Pasuk Zayin. In Pasuk Zayin, it says, "V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohanim eish al mizbeach." Like all of a sudden, the Torah reminds itself, "Hey, let's get back to the kohanim," implying that which came before that was not a requirement of kohanim, so that the hafshata and the nituach does not require a kohen. So the kohen now has to set up the eish on the mizbeach, and v'archu, the bnei Aaron, should set up the eitzim al ha'eish. And it's a little bit strange, because in Pasuk Ches, v'archu bnei Aaron hakohanis hanesachim, etc., al ha'eitzim. Again, he goes back and repeats bnei Aaron hakohanim, which seems to be totally redundant, because in Pasuk Zayin he mentioned bnei Aaron hakohen, and there was nothing in between Pasuk Zayin and Pasuk Ches. So why repeat bnei Aaron hakohen? And then after the bnei Aaron hakohen will place the nesachim on the mizbeach, that's together with the different parts of the animal. And again, we seem to be talking about bakar here, because the Torah never shifted its discussion about and left bakar, which would mean, according to our mission, that we're talking about 24 kohen. And the eitzim are on the eish, the kirbo ukrav yirchatz b'mayim. Okay, that's already something else. So basically, you have an entire parsha that ends at the end of Pasuk Tes and shifts back and forth between the kohanim and perhaps a zar, a non-kohen. Tana, we learned in a brayso, Hefsheitan v'nitucham shavim bizar, which means that there's no difference between hefsheit and nituach, and both of these I don't know what to call them, but both these parts of the avoda service, I don't want to call them avoda because avoda is only cherub a Kohen, but rather bizarre. A non-Kohen is okay. And on this brisa, Chizkiah is going to derive this conclusion from our apostle. Omar Chizkiah b'nayin lehevshe v'nituch sheshava bizarre. Here we turn to the actually, we still have a little bit left on Chofav and Beis. Shenemar v'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen ha'esh al hamizbeach. And we look now at getting back again to Pasuk Zion. And when we get to the Eish al hamizbeach, then it says v'nosnu b'nei Aaron. And therefore, Chizkiah is learning that Pasuk Vav with Hefshed and Nituach starts a new paragraph and does not require kahuna. It's only when we get to Eish al Mizbech, Nesinas Eish al Mizbech, Pasuk Zion, that's when the Torah requires a Kohen. And that's the analysis of Chizkiah. Nesinas Eish by kahuna. The Torah explicitly says that Nesinas Eish requires Hefshed and Nituach, which came in the previous Pasuk. Lo by kahuna. It does not require kahuna. And that would mean that even a zar could do the hefshed and the nituah. Now, there's another discussion here which is a little bit relevant, but not so relevant, about this concept of nesinas eish, because actually the Gemara tells us at the beginning of this parak that there were two fires that came down. I think it's actually at the end of the first parak. Anyway, there was one fire that came down from heaven, at least during Bayis Rishon, and then there was a mitzvah mishal hedja, meaning that we had to bring our fire, and that fire was lit by the Kohen. So this Nesinas Eish that requires kahuna, obviously is not talking about the Eish min hashamayim, but rather the Eish min hahedja. Now, does the Torah have to tell us that the Kohen is the one who has to place the fire? It would seem that even had the Torah omitted the Kohen here, we would have assumed it's the Kohen, because as we saw earlier in this parsha, with regard to Vekrivu B'nei Aaron HaKohen Saddam, the Torah has already told you that we require Kohen. So why did the Torah again have to repeat itself in Pasuk Zion, unless it's coming lafuke to exclude Pasuk Vav? Or as we put it, a new paragraph, Pasuk Vav, V'hifshid is ha'ol. So the Gemara says now on the top of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, Haimi boile legufe. And the Gemara is now arguing that we're not sure that the Kohen has to put the Eish on the Mizbeach, and we would not be able to derive that logically. And the reason for that is because when it comes to Dam, that's the Mechaper, that's Zikar Kapara, the Ritzi of the carbon. But when it comes to putting the Eish on the Mizbeach, although that's a critical preliminary, the Torah requires that the Kohen put the Eish there. But how do I know that it has to be a Kohen? Let a Zar put the Eish on the Mizbeach. I mean, that's not part of the Avodah per se. It's only a preliminary stage. So the Gemara therefore asks, Haimi boile legufe. How could Chizkiah say that the fact that the Torah singled out the Kohanim for the Nesinas Ha'esh, that implies that Hefshed and Nituach does not require a Kohen? That's not really true. The Torah had to emphasize, in the case of Eish, that you need Kohen, because I would have said that's just a Hechsher avoda. It's not part of the avoda per se. But maybe when it comes to Nituach and Afshata, that already links up with the previous pasuk with regard to the dam on the Mizbech, that requires a Kohen. Omar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, Ashkechate la Baye, Davi Masber le Libre. The answer to this question I found out when I encountered Abaye who's teaching his son. And he quoted a brisa that says V'shachat, Shchita Bizar Shera. So let's go back to Pasuk Hey. It says V'shachat is ben abakar l'fnei Hashem, and then V'krivu b'nei Aaron. Do you remember how we split up the Reish and the Sefer? That's exactly what Abaye is doing here. He's saying that the Sefer tells you that when it comes to V'krivu b'nei Aaron es hadam, v'zarkas hadam al mizbeach, that requires b'nei Aaron. But V'shachat at the beginning of the pasuk doesn't require b'nei Aaron, and therefore shchita kshera b'zar. Now the Brisa asks a question on itself. V'chimei ayin basa. What was your havamina? Meaning, the Brisa is trying to prove that which seems obvious, that shchita is kshera b'zar. And that is so because Michlal shenever v'ata bonecha itcha tishmeru es kuhunaschem. Okay, now this is a pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar, and it speaks about the Mizbeach. So let me just take a minute to open up. I have here a Chumash, and we're going to look in a second. I think it's Parshas Korach. What parak is Yud Ches, right? Oh, Yud Ches. Oh, Yud Ches. Pasuk Zayin. Ata v'ata ubanecha itcha tishmeru es kunaschem lechol dvar hamizbeach. And then it goes on to say, V'avadetem avodas matana. Matana is referring to Zrikas Adam. And then it says, V'azara karev yumos. So the Torah is specifying which avodah is an avodas kahuna, such that the zar who usurps such an avodah is chayiv misa. That's going to be tishmu es kunaschem for the dvar hamizbeach. V'avadetem avodas matana. Obviously, shchita doesn't fit that description. It's not an avodas matana, nor is it dvar hamizbeach. Shchita is not on the mizbeach. Is therefore shomei ani afilu b'shchita. Talmud lomar v'shachar es ben habakar. So the question is, where do you put the question mark and the answer in this brisa? It says, let's go over it again. V'chimei ayin basa. Why was there a havamina that a Kohen would be required for shchita? Oh, so I think the answer to the question is Michlal shenemar v'yato banecha itcha tichmu es kunaschem. I see. The Reish of the pasuk singles out the Kohen. And now the Gemara is saying, I think, in this brisa, that kol dvar mizbeach means anything that is necessary for the mizbeach. And you can't get to the dam unless you first do the shchita. Is shomei ani afilu shchita. Oh, that's how you read it. So now we understand that from the parsha in Korach, we have a serious havamina to say that anything that's connected to Kol Dvar HaMizbeach that's necessary in order to get the korban on the Mizbeach requires kahuna. And that passes a zar for shchita because the Torah says, "Ato banecha itcha tishmeru es kahunascha." Oh, Talmud Lomar. Now I make a full swing back to the beginning, and I read the pasuk here at the beginning of Vayikra. Okay, and the pasuk says, "V'shachad es ben aboker lifnei Hashem." And then Vikrivu b'nei Aaron es Adam, etc. And what do I learn from Vikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es Adam? Mikabala v'elech mitzvahs kehuna. A little bit of a stretch over here. It doesn't mention Kabbalah Saddam. It mentions Vikrivu. Vikrivu is really Holacha Saddam. But there's no such thing as Holacha Saddam without Kabbalah Saddam. So Kabbalah and Holacha are now integrated to form like one avoda that requires B'nai Aaron HaKohanim. But that's only beginning with Kabbalah, with Vikrivu. Vikrivu mi Kabbalah v'elech mitzvahs kahuna. But Shachat, the Shechita itself at the beginning of that pasuk, does not require kahuna. Okay, so far we're doing okay. When does the Kohen step up to the plate, so to speak, in baseball terms? When we get to Kabbalah Saddam, Holacha Saddam, Zrika Saddam. But Shechita that comes before that, that's Ksher B'Zar. Now, we get back to the pasuk. And the pasuk says in Dalet v'samach yado rosh ha'olah and v'shachat. So the same person who does v'samach yado rosh ha'olah is the same person in the very next pasuk of v'shachat. So therefore, samach yado v'shachat. We'll read those two psukim together as one. Now, there's a little bit of a confusion here because at the beginning, the Brisa derives the suitability of a zar for shchita from the pasuk b'shachat. Now, at the end of the Brisa, the Sefer, the Brisa is deriving it from a hekesh, a slichas haparshios between v'samach yodo and v'shachat. That the person who's v'samach yodo, which is the bailim of the korban, he's not a kohen, he does the shechita, or he could do the shechita. And I guess it's an integrated yalfusa. In other words, the pasuk v'shachat seems to indicate that you don't need a kohen, but we only know that because the v'shachat at the beginning of pasuk Hey goes back to the samach es yado in the previous pasuk Dalet. That's what I think is going on, and in a sense, there's a what's the word? I call it an integrated alfusa.
Do you ever wonder how they knew how to do the shachat?
What, the Talmud Shel Shachar, you mean?
No, how we're saying the individual who brings the korban, the smicha, and then the shachat, that's the individual who brings the korban. They're slaughtering a bull.
Right.
How does he know how to do that?
You mean he has to learn Hilchos Shechita, if that's what you mean?
Well, it's not the Kohen. Yeah, like it's not the Kohen that's doing it. The Kohen would know, right? This
But
is an
look
individual
today,
bringing a bull. The average person could not shech
No, but
a
I'm
bull.
saying
Would you know
your
how to
average
shech a bull?
shochet today, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, your average shochet who learns Shechita is not a Kohen. So anyone could learn Shechita. When we say that the Bailim have to do the Shechita, we don't mean that he has to do the Shechita. It means that despite the fact that he's a Zar, If he knows how to do the shechita, let him do it himself. It's like if you know how to do milah on your son, you might want to do your own milah on your son, right?
So he can have someone else. He can have someone else do the shechita, right?
Yes, yes.
So it doesn't have to be him personally.
You don't need a Kohen. Because
Right.
in
I
most
understand.
cases,
Okay.
in 99% cases, maybe I'm exaggerating, the Baal HaKorban is not a Kohen.
Right. Okay.
So shechita is kshera bizarre.
Right.
Okay. Now, it seems, see, I'm not sure which part of this Yalfusa needs the other part, if you follow me. Which is the weaker part and which is the stronger part. I suspect that the V'samach Yodav Shachat needs a little extra chizuk, a little strengthening, cavalry, to strengthen it. Because we're not 100% sure that V'samach Yodo and then the Shachat is the same person. But since we saw that at the end of the pasuk with Shachat, it says V'krivu bnei Aaron, which already gives us a very strong inclination to assume that we don't need the Kohanim until we get the Kabbalah V'elech, and the V'shachat at the beginning of the pasuk is not a Kohen. Now we begin to, convince ourselves that there's a hekesh here between the V'samach Yodo in the previous pasuk and the V'shachat. Now, we have this brisa which was quoted by Abaye and taught to his son. And now let's go back to Chizkiah. Michte, Mikabol Velech Mitzvahs Kahuna. Now that we've already established, based on the way we interpret Pasuk Hey, that we only need the Kohanim from Kabbalah V'elech, now let's go back and ask a question about Pasuk Zayin. That is, V'nosnu b'nei Aaron, etc., Eishal Mizbeach, Lomali. Why did the Torah again have to repeat b'nei Aaron? We've already established that mishchita, that mikabala v'elech, anything that goes beyond that in sequence requires a Kohen. So why did the Torah again have to say that when it comes to putting the fire on the Mizbeach, we need the Kohanim? That should be obvious. And we're really going in sequence, starting with Kabbalah Saddam, which the Torah says explicitly requires a Kohen. And then the Torah tells me that the Kohanim have to put the H on the Mizbeach. I mean, obviously, if you want to do the Torah al Gavi Mizbeach, you need the Kohen to do that. Comes on Chizkiah, and he says, L'me'ute hefshet v'nituach, that the reason why the Torah had to emphasize, which seems redundant, v'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen eish al mizbeach, is as a miut to exclude that which appears in the previous pasuk Vav, Afshata and Nituach. So again, we had a kasha on Chizkiah. And we said, Haimi boile legufe. In other words, how can you use the pasuk v'nosnu b'nei Aaron as a redundant pasuk to exclude Kohanim, or the requirement, right, from nituach v'hefshik? The answer is, I'll tell you why it's redundant. Because the Torah has already taught us, as we saw in this last brisa, that from Kabbalah Saddam v'elech, we need kahuna. And therefore, since Pasuk Zayin follows naturally, and is Nesinas Eishal Mizbeach, for sure we need kahuna. Why did the Torah have to go out of its way and spell that out? It's obviously redundant as a miut to exclude Hefshed and Nituach in the previous Pasuk. So the Gemara again raises an objection. I still don't know if the Torah didn't say explicitly that I need the Kohen to put the H on the Mizbeach. What happens if they're not maktir the basar? The basar gets lost or it contracts tumor, Nevertheless, the kapara is clinched with the zrikas hadam. So if the Kohen doesn't put the Eish on the Mizbeach, and they never actually burn the Emurim, nothing tragic has happened as far as the carbon is concerned. So therefore, the Eish al Mizbeach is not critical to the essence of the carbon, whose accomplishment is kapara. And came into lava voda ma'atva kapara, loti boy kuhuna. I need the Torah to repeat after telling me that the Kabbalah v'eleth culminating in Zrika, I need a Kohen. Now I need the Torah to go ahead and tell me something else. That when it comes to the Eishal Gabi Mizbeach, which is a separate mitzvah of Haktorah, that is not absolutely critical to the Kapara, I still need a Kohen. So don't tell me it's redundant, as Chizkiah would have it as a miv to exclude the singular qualification of a Kohen for Nituach and Afshata. By Kahuna, we're again stuck with trying to understand the derivation of Chizkiah that you don't need a Kohen for Hefshet V'Nituach. Elamei Hacha. So now the Gemara drops the ball on these psukim, and let's look a little bit further in this parsha. And it says in Pasuk Ches, we saw it before, let's read it again. V'archu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim Eis hanisachim es harosh ves hapodar al ha'etzim asher la'eish asher al ha'mizbeach. So the Kohanim are now putting the emurim onto the mizbeach. Now, we're talking about the emurim on the mizbeach. We said that that's not critical. That's not indispensable for the kapara. And yet the Torah explicitly requires kahuna. And if that be the case, Michti mi Kabbalah v'elech mitzvahs kahuna, v'archu lamali. Second, so what do you mean v'archu lamali? Oh, I see. Right, we had a Havamina that the Kohen is not absolutely necessary to put the H on the Mizbeach. The Torah went out of its way to tell me, therefore, that despite the fact that the H on the Mizbeach is not critical to the Avodas HaKapara, nevertheless, the Torah says explicitly, it spells it out, that we need Kohenim, and how much more so when we're talking about putting the Emurim onto the Mizbeach. Because what's the whole purpose of putting the Eish on the Mizbeach? It's obviously a preliminary stage to put the Basar onto the Eish. So why did the Torah have to repeat itself and require a Kohen to put the Rosh Vapadar onto the Eish? I mean, if the Torah requires that the Kohen create the Eish, then it goes without saying that it's the Kohen who has to put the Rosh and the Padar. You could have said logically, we don't even need Kahuna for the Eish, because we've already completed the kapara, we clinched it with Zrikas Hadam. But now the Torah says, nay, we need the Kohen even beyond that which is critical for kapara, namely to put the Eish on the Mizbeach. How much more so that the Kohen should be required to put the Rosh Vapada. So it's totally redundant for the Torah to tell me the Archu B'nei Aaron is Hadasafim. Elamai, that's I'm adding that, right? Now we have Chizkiah's derivation. So we thought that the redundant words in the Torah from which we exclude Kohanim in Hefshet V'Nituach were v'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen Eishal Mizbeach in Pasuk Zayin. Man, we need those. We need that Pasuk. It's not redundant at all. But once we have Pasuk Zayin, then Pasuk Ches becomes redundant. The Archu b'nei Aaron is Harosh v'Sapod. Fekte Gemara v'Ema lemute Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So now we get to Pasuk Zayin. Pasuk Zayin says, "V'nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohanim eish al mizbech v'archu eitzim al ha'eish." Eitzim is in the plural, and that teaches us that they need a minimum of 2 pieces of wood, and that's called Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. I think we mention it every morning in the Karbanos. Abaye Hayu Sidra the Avoda Bishmei the Abashol. You remember that? It's a Mishnah and it's a Gemara in Zvachim, and I think it's Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is there on the list. I don't have a siddur in front of me. And now, why don't we assume that the extra pasuk in Ches of the Archu B'nei Aaron is shedding a light on the end of the previous pasuk Zayin, of the Archu Eitzim al Ha'esh. And it's coming to tell us that Siddur Gizrei Eitzim, Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, does not require Kohanim, but maybe Nituach V'Afshata does require Kohanim. So the Gemara says, Mistabra Divcha de Kavase Memait. Okay, let's just see. The key word here is the kavase. We're trying to set up some sort of similarity, the kavase. So we have a number of candidates here. We have the Rosh V'Padar, and we have the Gizrei Eitzim. He says that Divcha de Kavase Mimait, and we're talking about the Rosh and a Padar. And it makes sense that since the pasuk says what? It says the Archu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es hanesachim es harosh, and you want to say that maybe this pasuk is coming to exclude the end of the previous pasuk v'arichas eitzim. The answer is it's more logical to exclude nituach and afshata. Why? Nituach afshata is more fundamentally similar to Arichas, Nisachim, and Rosh V'Pada, because they're all part of the korban itself. Right? What do we do after Hafshata and Nituach? We put the remainders of the basar onto the Mizbeach. So in that sense, it's very similar to the Archu Es HaNisachim Es HaRosh V'Pada. And if the Torah went out of its way to tell you that you need kahuna for placing the nesachim of the Rosh V'Padar on the H, then assuming that's superfluous because we already derived kohanim from the previous pasuk about the H itself, how much more so the Rosh V'Padar? The whole purpose of the H was for the Rosh V'Padar. So if it's coming to exclude, we want to use it as a miyat for something that's similar. And what's more similar to putting a murim onto the fire? You have 2 candidates. It could either be the nituach and afshata, which prepares the limbs of the animal for haktar al gabi mizbeach, or the eish, which is already a preliminary stage to set up the mizbeach for the haktar. So the logic of Chizkiah, says the Gemara, is by it's an interesting principle of how to derive halachas from the Torah. That when there's a miut because of a redundancy, you'd look for something that's very similar that could have been included in that same halacha, and because there was a redundancy, therefore I exclude that. But even though I have another choice of saying I could exclude something else, but that is not similar to that which is in the ball game, in the bag. So I'd rather exclude something that's similar and it's in the same bag, in the same sphere and circle, than exclude something that's one step more removed.
Right.
So the Gemara is not happy with this. Adarabba sidur de kavase memait. The Gemara now thinks that setting up the Aish. No. Forget about the Aish. Setting up the Eitzim for the Aish is more similar to burning the Rosh V'Padar on the Aish. Here, I think, Ira, the key word is the word sidur. Lisader. In other words, we have something called nituach and afshata. That's not called sidur. Again, we need to clean out certain parts of the limbs in order to be machshir them for the Torah. But we're not putting anything on the Mizbeach. Sidur means to organize the Eish HaMizbeach for the Torah. And that Sidur requires two things. Number one, to be Mesader the Eitzim, so that you have fuel, combustion, for the Haktorah. Number two, to be Mesader the Rosh and the Padar, meaning those parts of the limbs of the animal that have to be burnt on the Mizbeach. So there's a more striking similarity. If there's an extra pasuk of the Archu B'nei Aaron as Hadasaf B'Sarash, it's more logical to exclude, meaning to exclude the requirement of kahuna in the case of Sidur Eitzim, because Sidur Eitzim is a preparation of the Mizbeach itself for the Haktorah. So we have two stages that are very closely related for the Haktorah. In truth, we have what comes before an X? W, right? We have W, X, Y, and Z, as you say it in Canada, right? So what do you have in a W? The W is hafshata v'nitua. Now you've prepared the limbs of the animal.
Okay.
Now we're up to X. X is going to be Sidur Gizrei Eitzim. We're already one step beyond that. We're now on the Mizbeach itself, arranging and ordering the Mizbeach in such a way that we can be maktir the Mizbeach. Because Z here is going to be the Aktar itself. So that's W. W is Sidur Mara. Then, I'm sorry, that was X. So we had W. I'm sorry, I got myself. So we had W, which was the Hafshata V'Nituach. Now, we have X, which is the Sidur Gizrei Eitzim. We're really close now to the clincher, which is Haktar, but we need one more stage, which is called Y, and that's going to be Arichas Haroshva Podar Al HaMizbeach, placing it on the Mizbeach. Now, Zippo, we're ready, bingo, I should say, we're ready for the Haktar. So if the puzzle in the Arichas Rosh V'Padar mentions kahuna, and that's redundant, we never would have thought otherwise, then we should exclude from Y, we should exclude X, which is closer to Y than W. Mar says, Lo Salkadai. The Omar Mar, we have another brisa that says, V'hikriv HaKohen es HaKol HaMizbecha. Now, for this, we have to fast forward in the same parsha. And it says, "V'akere pasuk Yud Gimel akro ayin yirchatz mamayim v'ikriv hakohen es hakol." And then it says, "V'ktir hamizbecha." I know the Gemara left out the word "v'ktir," as far as I can tell. V'ktir hamizbecha. Zo holachas evarim lakevish. So now we're crossing out the W as we had filled it in, and we're filling in the W in a different way. The W, which is the last stage in the process of organizing the Mizbeach, is now going to be the holacha. Holacha means, like, the shechita was done, etc., on the floor of the Azara. Now we have to climb up to the Mizbeach in order to be maktir the murim. So we climb up the kevesh, and the Torah requires that the Kohen will climb up the kevesh. In fact, I think in the previous mission, if I remember, we had the pious about which Kohen will be zocher to carry up the limbs on up the kevesh. And the Torah explicitly requires Kohanim. So now we're going to say the following: Holachas eivarim lekevesh hu debay kahuna. Holachas eitzim lo boy kahuna. We have a brisa that excludes eitzim, or at least holachas eitzim. We'll get back to that. From kahuna, we don't require kohanim for holachas eitzim. Hasidur shnei gizrei eitzim by kahuna. So the Gemara is now making an about face, and the Gemara is assuming now that it's impossible to interpret Pasuk Ches, the Orch B'nei Aaron, etc., in its redundancy to exclude the requirement of Kohen from Siddur Gizrei Eitzim, because in fact we do require a Kohen for Siddur Gizrei Eitzim, and the Brisa derives this from the Pasuk the Hikra Kohenes Hakol HaMizbecha, which is a reference to Holacha. So now we have two stages in the Eitzim. We have the Holachas Eitzim on the Kevesh, up the Kevesh, and then we place the Eitzim on the Mizbeach, which is called Sidur Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. From the fact that the Torah, according to this brisa, excludes the requirement of Kohen for Holachas HaEitzim, the implication is that for the Sidur HaEitzim on the Mizbech, we do require Kohen. And therefore it's impossible to say that the Pasuk, the Archu, as a redundancy, is coming to exclude Kohanim from Sidur Gizrei Eitzim, because Gemara is now making a full swing, 360 degrees turnabout, and in fact, Sidur Gizrei Eitzim does require Kahuna. So therefore, we understand Chizkiah, the Archu Lamali, the redundancy of the Archu. Why did the Torah have to spell out the Kohanim for placing the Rosh and the Poder on the Mizbeach? We know that for sure because the Kohanim are in charge of lighting the Eish. So I thought that now we could take a break. We finally are, at home plate. No, we're still not out in the clear. The Ema Hachinami Legufe. Once again, we're going to assume Legufe. What does that mean? See, for this Gemara of Legufe, we won't understand until we see the end of the sugya. The Gemara saw this like a cliffhanger. You know what I mean? The Gemara doesn't reveal to us exactly what is Legufe here. But in any event, whatever it is, Legufe is a TKO here. It knocks Chizkiah's drasha out of the box. Hello. Now, once again, we have to go back to the drawing board, and we're going to quote this pasuk: "Vehiktir hakohen es hakol." L'mai asa. So now we go back to pasuk tes. It says at the end of pasuk tes, "Vehiktir hakohen es hakol hamizbecha olah ishay re'et lichoch Hashem." Limute hefshet v'nitua. And this seems to be where the Gemara benches Hagomel here. This is the end of the road to understand Chizkiah and the derivation of the Zar being suited for Hefshet V'nituach, because it says V'hiktir HaKohen Es HaKol HaMizbecha, which is an extra pasuk. And comes L'Mu'ute Hefshet V'nituach. Now V'hikriv HaKohen Es HaKol HaMizbecha, and now we're back to this pasuk test. So holachas evarim lakevish. Holachas evarim lakevish hu deboy kahuna. Holachas eitzim lo boy kahuna. Hasidush negizri eitzim boy kahuna. So this was the derivation that we had earlier. That shnei gizri eitzim require kahuna to be organized on the maracha. Now it says V'nosnu. And now we're going to get a little bit of an insight into what the Gemara meant before by legufe. Okay, so now we are going back to the pasuk V'nosnu. Let me just see which pasuk was that. V'nosnu. Pasuk Zayin. V'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen eish al mizbeach. Legufe. So this tells me that you need a Kohen to light the fire on the Mizbeach. Let me just double check that. All right, I think that's the pshat. Now, keep in mind, we have in this pasuk two words, both are written in the plural. It starts with the word v'nosnu, and then it ends with the word v'archu. Why does the Torah use a plural? V'archu shnayim. And then it says, oh, b'nei Aharon, that's also in the plural, another shnayim. And then it says, hakon. So it's b'nei Aaron hakon. That's another two. So it's 2, 4, 6. Now this takes us back to the Mishnah on Daf Chavav Amid Beis. And the Mishnah requires 6 Kohanim for the Karban Tamid. And where do we see that? It says somewhere, wherever it says it. Okay. So now this is really wild. The entire parsha that we've been learning here is talking about baka. It's talking about a person who brings his own private olah and he brings it min baka. So I state in Pasuk Gimel. Now our Mishnah says that how many Kohanim do you need for the bakar? 24 Kohanim. And now you're deriving from the triple plurals that we need 6 Kohanim. Amar of Hamduna, Kasha Leila Rabbi Elazar. Hai ben bakar ksiv. This whole parsha is addressing an olah that's brought mina bakar. Mina bakar, the Mishnah says, Esrim v'arba boy. And now you're deriving from this pasuk that you need only 6 Kohanim. V'nichale. And Rabbi Elazar had an answer to this question. What was his answer? Ala eitim asher ala eich asher ala mizbeach. Right, the same pasuk. V'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohanim eish ala mizbeach, and it mentions the eish, and it mentions v'archu ha'eitzim. Ezu davar shenemer bo eitzim eish umizbeach. Here in the parsha we have eitzim, eish, and mizbeach. Now, why does the Torah have to bother with eitzim and eish? Already before this, we have a pasuk that mentions eitzim and eish. It says, "V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish v'archu eitzim." And now again, it mentions in the next pasuk ches eitzim and eish. That would seem to be redundant. It will turn to Daf Chav Zayin with Beis. Hevi Omer Zetle. Now, for this, we have to learn Vayikra Perek Vav. And then, when the Torah addresses the Korban Tamid, the Tamid Shel Shachar, it says over there. Let's just open up to Vav, Perek Vav Pasuk Beis. Savas Bnei Es Aaron v'es Bonav Leimar Zos Torah Sa'ola Hi Ola Al Mukda Al Mizbeach Kol Laila Raboka v'Eish Al Mizbeach Tukad Bo. And this is the avoda of the Tamid Shel Shachar. Now the Tamid Shel Shachar was brought with a tleh. So the very fact that it says in the pasuk Al Mokdah, which means that we need the fire on the mizbeach going aflame, right? So it means that even if there was an eish yesterday on the mizbeach that's still burning, we still need a new eish al mokdah. Now that's a special halacha that applies exclusively to the Korban Tamid. There's no other carbon that requires that we burn and light a new fire for that carbon, except for the Tamid Shel Shachar, which the Torah spells out.
Right.
So therefore, if eitzim and eish have a special requirement to burn new wood and create a new fire for the Korban Tamid, then by definition, we understand that in our parsha, in Perek Aleph, which is the parsha of Ola of a Yachid, not of a Korban Tzibur, and it's being brought min habakar, there's such thing as an Olas Tzibur min habakar, the additional words eitzim and eish could not possibly be referring to bakar, because the eitzim and the eish here are the eitzim and the eish that we'll see later on in Perek Vav, a new fire with new eitzim for the sake of the Korban Tamid, which is brought with a tleh. And the Mishnah establishes that the number of kohanim that we need for a tleh is 6 kohanim. So I'll just read to you here. He has a note in the English translation. He says, since the wood and the fire, that means the eish and the eitzim, have a special requirement in the Korban Tamid, Rabbi Elazar therefore concludes that the redundant reference to wood and fire here in the beginning of Parshas Vayikra, which is with regard to the Olam min habakar, these are remasiv to the Korban Tamid, because otherwise they're totally superfluous. So therefore he's going to interpret the verse that teaches 6 kohanim, right, the double your requirement in plural 3 times over, as referring to the Tamid, which means the sheep and not the cattle, not the cow. So therefore the eish and the eitzim arrangement are mentioned in this section, this parsha of Olas HaYachid, simply because that's the beginning of the presentation of Karbanos. I mean, the first parsha of Karbanos is here in Perek Aleph of Sefer Vayikra regarding the Olas Yachid. But really what the Torah is telling you here in the parsha of Olas Yachid, paradoxically, is halacha in Korban Tamid, which is only going to be presented 6 chapters later in Perek Vav. Now, again, we don't have time to go on, but in the next sugya, which is fascinating, a sugya of Ravasi, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, where the Sidur Hamaracha, if it was done by a Zar instead of a Kohen, because now we came to the conclusion that the fire has to be brought by a Kohen. If, let's say, a Zar usurps that avoda, and he puts the Eish on the Mizbeach, is he chayav? Okay, fine, he's chayav because it's an avodah that requires kahuna. And when a zar takes the avodah of a kohen and he implements it, he's chayav b'sibidei shamayim. But now let's say the zar already did such a terrible thing, and he put the eish on the mizbeach. What do we do now? What can we do to repeal? Is that a good word? To replace the original eish. And here Rabbi Yochanan says, Parka v'chozer v'sodra. In a sense, he's got to start from the scratch. The zar will have to take apart that cedar eitzim and start from scratch, which makes no sense. Because you don't gain anything if the zar again is going to do what he did on the first round. As the Gemara objects, my mahanile, how's it going to work? So the Gemara rewrites the text over here, Ela Parko Zar v'Sodra Kohen, that the zar will disassemble that which he assembled, and when he placed the eitzim on the mizbeach, that's not good. We can't light that eitz because it was done by a zar. And now, after the zar removes that which he put on the mizbeach, now the kohen is going to organize the mizbeach again. So we'll stop here with Maskif Le Rab Zera. And
okay,
thank you
very
so much.
good.
Okay, we accomplished
Yeah, excellent. Okay, very good.